Good evening. Hope you are all doing well. Tonight, the learning is sponsored Lilu Nishmas, my brother Avi, Avram Gershom ben Shmuel Mordechai. He would have been quite proud to see the evolution of this Daf Yomi Chavura with my father as a regular. What? It's baby brother. Yeah, it would have been quite proud. He wouldn't have joined, but he would have been proud to watch from the side. It would have been a happy participant from watching. A happy cheerleader is probably the right way to do it. Baruch Hashem, I think this is the 7th year now. Yeah, he probably is. Yeah, absolutely. The first time I davened Musaf here was 6 weeks after he passed away with a respiratory infection. That was a disaster. And then whatever, like the years have moved on. I told Rabbi Robinson I need to stop being a Bal Musaf since he came where they announced her cancer here. Rabbi Robinson's father died on Rosh Hashanah. We have had tragedy. Well, you guys got to pull someone from the bullpen, like get a southpaw out there, like someone. Right. No. His neshama should have an aliyah. We're starting 3/4 of the way down on Ayin Dalet Amud Beis. And the Gemara tells us of a story. Hahu Gavra de Amar le Arise. There was a man who told the person working in his field, Kule Alma in general, Dalu Tlas, Dalvasa. Usually people water the ground 3 times, Ve'achle Riva, and the worker gets to eat 1/4 of the food. Now it's kind of like the standing assumption. The Gemara then says, I want you to do different. Dali arba v'achal tilsa. I'll give you more. I'll give you 1/3, but I want you to water the field 4 times instead of 3. So he did most of his work. He got, let's say it was 4 times a day. He did 6 a.m. He did 9. He did 12. And then it started raining. So the Gemara says, if Lasov Asa Mitra, by the 4th time, Rashi highlights, we're talking about the 4th time, he wasn't able to do that 4th watering because it was raining. What are you going to do? We're going to put water on top of water? Like, that's completely unnecessary. So this is a machlokas amoraim as to whether or not this deal is now in force. Does he get 1/4 of the foods, or does he get 1/3 of the foods? Because the deal was that he would get 1/3 because he would water 4 times, but the 4th watering was out of his control. So do we say that because the 4th watering is out of his control, he should still get 1/3, or no? Would he go with the more lenient approach, which is that he should get 3? He should get 1/4 instead of 1/3. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, Halo Dala. This guy, Tachlis, he didn't do what he was supposed to do. Not his fault, just the way things are. And Rabba Amar, no, Ha Lo Itzricha. He didn't need to do anything, and he still should get 1/3. So machlokas in the Amorai. And the Gemara tries to connect it to a machlokas that we spoke about yesterday. Lema, perhaps we should say Rav Yosef Damar Keraban and Rabba Damar Keraban Shimon ben Gamliel. Maybe we should say that there are party lines here, and that therefore these 2 Amoraim are actually rooted in Tanoim. Says the Gemara, that can't be, but for a very out of left field reason. The reason it can't be is because there's no way that Rabbah could be in the same camp as Rabban Gamliel. First of all, the Tizbra is this logical. V'ha'kaimalan, in general, we hold Hilchasa Kavase de Rabbah. So we know that the halacha is typically like Rabbah. But here, Uvaha, ein halacha k'Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, which means that Rabba and Shimon ben Gamliel are oil and water in this case, because not as it relates to our sugya, but in general we paskin like Rabba, and in this case we don't paskin like Shimon ben Gamliel. So you can't have Rabba and Shimon ben Gamliel. Therefore, the Gemara says, Ela la'olam, really what's going on is that it's kirabban, and it's not like the machlokes of the Amoraim connects to the Tanaim, but rather it's like the Dindar, like the case of the Rabbanon. Really, both Rav Yosef and Rabba are in the camp of the Rabbanon. How does this work out? Rav Yosef Kirabanon, that fits like hand to glove. That makes perfect sense. And therefore, Rav Yosef is going to say that he is Chayv. The Rabbanon were strict. The Rabba says, Rabba Amar Lach, Ana de Amre Afilu Rabbanon. I typically also hold like the Rabbanon, to be strict. But here's why I'm lenient. Ad kan lo kamri Rabbanon hasam elo de litzuura kamechavin. Remember where they were talking about it to be difficult for the wife. But aval hacha over here, in our case of the sharecropper, Mishum harvacha was to make parnasa, the halo itzrech. And the fact is, okay, he didn't have to do the actual 4th watering, but Lamaisi should still get 1/3 of the food, the larger amount. All right, sugya number 1. And the very first of the very long lines, Tanan Hasam, we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah writes, Barishona, initially when people would sell homes, they would have a 12-month, up to 12 months to return a house. So Nitman, the guy, the person who bought the house, he knew that the end of the 12 months was coming up. On the last day, he'd hide so that nobody could find him. Says the Gemara, Nitman Yom Shnei Masar Chodesh Kidei Sheyehei Chalut Lo. he would hide so that no one would be able to find him. And then the transaction would be definite and he'll get to keep the property. Shtickle Ramos. It's not nice, but if the guy really has 12 months, you should be available for him to get the property back. It's a din in Chumash. So the Gemara says, 5 lines from the bottom, Hiskin Hillel Hazakin, Shecholesh es Ma'osav Lelishka. He says you should basically put the money in escrow. The guy should put the money in escrow. And the guy who initially sold the property, if he has regret, he sold his mother's house, he feels bad, whatever. He feels bad, he can literally break down the door. It's his house. And when the other guy, the buyer, wants to go and get his money, so that's a takana of Hillel. We see that Hillel was very conscientious about making sure certain transactions would take place. Pruzbo v'chule. We do see a fair number of takanas from him, and this would be one of them.
Where would you put the money?
It says he would put it in the lishka, which it doesn't seem to be the lishka in the Beis Hamikdash. That doesn't really make sense. But seemingly the money was just put on the side. The money that he spent was put on the side.
He gave it to the base then,
so the buyer, let's say I'm selling you the house. This is a perfect conversation for a real estate agent. Let's say that I am. I'll do it the nicer way. I'm going to buy a house from you, right? So I give you 400. Well, in our neighborhood, I give you $800,000. Okay, things have changed. I bought my house for $400,000. It's a 40-foot property. Things have changed in the last 7 years. So I give you $800,000. I sold you what happened? What happened? If I'm buying a house from you, so you're selling to me, I give you money, but you feel bad, you have regret. So that money that I gave you is sitting in an escrow account. If you want to back out on the sale, you can't go in the house, and then I'll just take my money back later. That's the case. And Hill said it's not fair if the guy should hide. This is the solution: is that we're going to make sure that the money is still available.
No, I think he shows up with a bag full of money and puts it in escrow.
That was the takana.
Right.
Yeah, the takana is that the buyer puts the money in an escrow account.
He's looking.
The seller, what?
The one who wants to be told it and wants to get it back.
Buyer and seller. I sold my house and now I regret it. It's 11 months and 29 days. It's 11 months and 29 days, and you're hiding in the basement.
You want it back. So you come in with money looking for jail, but you can't find it. So you drop the money in escrow and then you bang the door down. It's your buying it back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that's what you said.
Oh, okay. It's certainly what was happening in my head.
Yeah.
It's a disconnect.
You're buying it back.
Yeah.
Because their money, where is it? They're good. It
says Lishka. It doesn't.
I don't know.
I don't know what Lishka means.
Some neutral.
Rashi says Zorik, Lishka, mitukenes lekach. It's a place where it's set aside. It's a bank, whatever. It's an escrow account, which is our for sure for today. I'm trying to sell my car, but I need to go through an escrow company, escrow.com. They create a safe scenario where everybody's money is protected so that you don't pay before that getting the car. Fine. Now, based on this takana, we have 2 versions of what Rava tried to infer from the takana. The Amar Rava, or just Amar Rava, according to some Girsos. Amar Rava, mitakanaso shel Hillel nishma, we can infer the following. In a case where somebody says, a husband says, this is your get on the condition that you give me 200 zuz. If she gives it to him and he knows what's going on, he's a willing participant, they're divorced. And al korcho ena megurashes. Now, says the Gemara, because Hillel taught us that there is a scenario in which we can force the giving back of the money, because I'm collecting my house that I sold you, which I now have regret for selling. I have a seller's remorse, and I want to get my house back before the 12-month mark, 11 months and 29 days. I come with a bag of money and I barge the door down. I say, give me my house back. Mutter. So if that's true over there, that we are allowed to force it, Michlal, turning to the top of Ayin Hamad Aleph, that implies the Alma, that in general, Nesina Bal Korche Lo Havya Nesina. If Hillel had to make the takana, it seems to be that in general, this really isn't normally the case, and we wouldn't normally assume that Nesina Bal Korcha is a Nesina. Rather, we would assume that a Nesina Bal Korcha is Lo Havya Nesina. And the Gemara says that that's not a very simple statement of Rava. Maskiv Lo Rav Papa, the Tamer of Simi Barashi. We don't know who asked the question. The Dilma Ki Itzrich Le the Tikune Shelo B'fana. Perhaps the only time when we have this scenario is when The issue that we're dealing with is shelo b'fanav. Aval b'fanav bein midaito bein bal korcho havya nesina. Perhaps Rava's diuk is wrong. And really, the only time Hillel made his takana is where we're dealing with something that's not directly in front of us, but where we have a get and we're talking about monies that have to transfer. Your inference is wrong, Rava. And therefore, there's actually another version of Rava, because that first version of Rava really didn't make a lot of sense. And the Gemara says, V'ika de Amre, some say that Rava's inference about Hillel's takana was a little different. 5 lines down on Ayin Hey Amud Aleph. Omar Rava, mitakanaso shel Hillel, harei ze gitech almanas shetisni li masayim zuz. He says Rava says that I can learn from the case of Hillel about a case where a husband says, here's your get on the condition that you pay me 200 zuz. V'nosna lo bein midaito vein bal korcho havya nesina. This one makes more sense because the first one had the question of Rav Papa. This one doesn't. V'chi itzrich leila Hillel etikune shelo b'fanav. Aval b'fanav bein midaito bein bal korcho havya nesina. So that's what the Gemara says, is that the only time that Hillel really was required to give his takana was shelo b'fanav. Now Rav Papa has another question. Maskif la Rav Papa v'temer of Simi bar Ashi. Again, we just don't know the flow of events. We don't know what Rava actually said. He said one of 2 things, and it's just a little unclear. And Rav Papa asked the question. We just don't know what his question was. What's his question here? The dilma afilu b'fanav nami. Even if the issues we were dealing with were b'fanav, midaito in al korcho lo. And the Gemara says that perhaps it's the case that that it really depends about das. The Hillel, my itzrichle letakin. So let's take a look at Rashi as to what that line means. Rashi says on the second and third lines, my itzrichle takin. Ra'a shahaya nitman. We saw the guy was hiding. V'hiskin debal korcho v'shelo b'fanav tehenasina. He made a specific takana, Hillel, that because this guy is being a jerk, the buyer, he doesn't want to have his house be what's the word when it gets recollected? Repossessed, maybe. Is what? Foreclosed? Whatever. All right, whatever. Have his car taken. I like the bigger words, Where's Mark? So he didn't want to have his house taken back. Come on, had he been there, we would have needed Hillel anyways. But there are cases where we didn't need Hillel. The gabe get de asirahu lo kaima takanasa de Hillel. By a get, we don't need the takana of Hillel. Get has a different set of halachos because we know that by a get, bal korcha is a normal thing. In other words, to make this a little bit shorter, the rule of Hillel applies in the fiscal realms in Mominus, but it doesn't apply in regards to Isurim, which is the appropriate way to divide Hillel. Good. That brings us to a third of the way down. How do we paskin in all of the sugyas we've been learning over the last many days? The Gemara only gives 3 lines about this, but it's crystal clear. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan. As a general rule, kol makom sheshana rashbag b'mishnasenu halacha kamoso chutz me'erev v'tzidon v'raya achrona, except for 3 cases where we're talking about an arev, which is a guarantor. We're going to learn about this later. Tzidon is our mishnah, so we don't paskin like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel was the mekel. He wanted to say you can give the damim with your tanai, so we paskin not like him. And also the third case is raya achrona, and this is a sugya in Maseches Sanhedrin, Ayin in Rashi, that the details about a case of Edus, we're not going to dig into that now. All right, let's dig into a new sugya. It's all connected. New is a relative term. Tanu Rabbanan, a third of the way down, a little bit more. Let's say the guy is a pauper. So he writes the get, but he can't even afford to let her keep the paper. We have stories like this of Achronim, who used to write their drushos and their chidushim on the walls of their homes. They pashut could. I went to the store today, bought 500 pieces of papers for $6. They were penniless. Our wealth is astronomical. It's not normal.
Cigarette and writing on the paper.
It's not normal. It's not normal. Anywhere to write a chiddush. So we don't understand these worlds. Okay. So if a man says, you are divorced, but I need the paper. The paper's still mine. So what's the din? Eina megureshes. That's not considered a divorce because you're an Indian giver. What the words are mine in the paper, that's not how it works. There needs to be a functional document. However, a very slight difference, but a very important difference. Almanas shetachziri li yasaniyar. We're divorced. This is yours, but I'm adding in an almanas. I'm adding in, I'm going to use the word condition, but as we learned on Shabbos, al-manas doesn't always mean what we think it means. But I need you to give me the paper back at some point. So then the halacha is megureshes. In the first case, when I gave it to you, I said the get is yours and the paper is mine. In the second case, I said, here's your get on the condition that you return the paper to me later. Says the Gemara, Michael's question, Maishna Reishno, Maishna Seifa. These two cases look nearly identical. So in case number one, we're saying I'm giving you a get, but the paper is mine, splitting the hair of the ink and the paper. And in case number two, he's saying, later, down the road. Now, she doesn't have to put it in a frame. She just has to accept it. And then she can give it back. She can do whatever she wants. She can burn it. She can throw it out. We don't like to burn it because we want to know that the divorce actually happened. Mamzer Shilas. She should keep it, but she can also give it back to them. In theory, she can. So let's see what the answer is. A few approaches here in the Gemara. I think it's 3 approaches. 1, 2, 3 approaches. Here's approach number 1, halfway down. Amar Rav Chizda Hamani, Rashbaghi. Says the Gemara, what do you mean Rashbaghi? Do Amar Titain Lo Es Dameha. Elsewhere, yesterday, we learned that you can give the financial equivalent of that which is the condition. So here too, Hachanami, Efshar Demefaisa Le Bidami. Maybe she can pay back the cost of the paper and she can still keep the paper. So let's say that he writes a get on a piece of parchment. The parchment is $5. He gives it to her. She accepts it. She pays him cash equivalent of the, and then she's divorced, 100% divorced. Now that works. That's according to Rashbag. Maskiv la Abaye. Hang on one second. Amor to Amar Rashbag hecha delay sebeine. Maybe the only time Rav Shimon ben Gamliel recommended the possibility that you can pay for that which is missing only when we don't have the item. But perhaps hecha de ise beine mi Amar. I know where the get is. She's holding it in her hand. I can see it. She's holding it. So perhaps there, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel doesn't allow to be paying back the financial equivalent of that which was taken. So it says the Gemara, therefore, we reject answer number 1. Ella, 2/3 of the way down on Ayin Hamad Aleph, Amar Abaye Hamani, who then must be the author of this paradoxical Mishnah, where the Resha is Eina Megureshes and the Seif is Megureshes. Ella Amar Abaye Hamani, Rev Meir he, to Amar, Ba'inan Tnai Kaful, Vahacha, Halo Kafle Litnaeha. We saw this elsewhere in Shas. This requires a little bit of cup, not too much, just a little bit. And that is that we know by the Shvatim who lived to the west of the Yarden, they wanted that property because it was great for pasture. So Moshe said, if you fight for us on the east side, on the west side of the Jordan, correct. If you fight, what we now call Israel, if you fight on the west side with us, then you can have that land. And he doubled the thing. And if you don't, then you can't. That's the double Tanai. But our Mishnah only has one Tanai. Our Mishnah says, Almanas shetachziri li'asanir. And it doesn't say anything else. So perhaps, says the Gemara, perhaps Rav Meir says that we're dealing with a case here, a Ba'inan Tanai Kaful, and therefore, because there isn't a Tanai Kaful, your Tanai is a 0. And therefore, you're Megureshes, because your Tanai is irrelevant. It's as if you never said it. And therefore, in the Resha is a non-starter because the paper and the ink were separated. That you can't do. But the Seifa should have worked, could have worked, but you didn't follow the regular rules of making a Tanai, because a Tanai has to be mirrored after the Tanai that's in the Torah, which is Ruvain and Gad and Chasi Shevet Menashe. And there it was a double Tanai that if yes, then yes, and if no, then no. And because there's only one Tanai, therefore the Tanai is puzzle, and therefore the get is kosher because the Tanai is irrelevant. It's as if you never said it. And says the Gemara, 12 lines from the bottom, Maskifla Rava, wait 1 second. Taima, the reason why this get is kosher is because the lo kafle litzna. What? No. What? Where are you? Maskifla Rava.
Yeah.
Taima, the reason why the second case, the case where he says the Tanai of where Migureshes almanas shetachziri li'asaniyah. So the Gemara says, Rava's bothered because he makes an inference. He says, Taima, the reason why the condition is puzzle and the get is kosher is because the lo kafle l'tanai, because you didn't have a double Tanai. If you had a double Tanai, Okay, that's another level. But because there's only one, but hakatla litzna lo havagita. The chora, had you done this correctly, then it wouldn't have been a get because the condition would have been met. And had she not given back the paper, they would not be divorced. But that's a problem. Why? Michti, because says the Gemara, kol tanai mehechan gamrinanu. Where do we learn the principles of how to make a tanai? Says the Gemara, mitznai b'nei Gad uvnei Ruvain. That was the Tanai that Moshe made with the Shvatim of Gad and Ruvain. And what was the condition? If you fight with me in Eretz Yisrael, then I'll give you the land to the east of the Yarden. And here's the second part of the Tanai. And if you don't fight with me in Eretz Yisrael, you will not get the land to the west of the Yarden. Now, what else do we know about this Tanai? Mahasam, Tanai Kodem Lamaisa, Afko Tanai Kodem Lamaisa. What we need is the condition to come before the action, right? What is the action? The action is taking the land. What did Moshe say? If you fight with me, the Tanai, then you get the Maisa, you get the land. So that needs to be how they're structured. But the case that we're dealing with is backwards. Lafuke hacha de Maisa kodem litnai. That here, the Maisa, the action is before the condition. What does this mean? Take a look at Rashi, 8 lines from the bottom. To Amar La first, Zegitech Beresha, which is the Maisa, and the Tnai v'Hadar al Manas Tachziri Asanir. So the templating is incorrect. The appropriate templating should be that the Tnai should come first. What he should have said is, if you return this document to me, we will then be divorced. But he didn't say that. He said, Hare zegitech almanas shetachzireni es aniyar. And therefore, he says that it shouldn't work no matter what happens. Even if you have a double Tanai, you've broken a different rule about the Tanaim, not just that it's doubled, but that the Tanai should come before the Maisa. In our case, the Maisa came before the Tanai. Ela Marava, it must therefore be the case in our Mishnah that the reason why it is that the get is kosher and why the Tanai didn't work is because you broke the rules of Tanai. Mishum demaisa kodem l'Tanai. And that's why the second case in the Brisa that we started with today, the case of Hareza Gitech al Manashe Tachzireni as Haniyar, the reason that doesn't work, even if you would have had both conditions, you wrote the conditions the wrong direction. You should have written the Tanai before the Maisa, but instead you wrote the Maisa before the Tanai. You should have written, when you return the paper to me, then we will be divorced. The condition first and the Maisa later. But instead, our Brisa said, Hareze Gitech, the result and the condition after, and that does not work. Good. So Maski Flor of Adabar, wait 1 second. Let's make a diuk. Taima, the reason why you're saying why the condition in our Brisa doesn't work, and therefore, the reason why she is divorced in this case is because the Maisa Kodem L'Tnai, because we just pointed out, the Hareza Gitech was before the Almanas Tachzireni. So says the Gemara, what's the diuk from there? Hatnai Kodem L'Maisa, had it been that the Tnai was in good condition, that the Tnai came first, let's say he reversed it and said, if you're going to be Tachzireni Esaniyar, then Hareza Gitech. So then the Gemara says, Michli, wait 1 second. Wait 1 second. Where do we learn our rules from? As we already know, mitnai b'nei Gad uvnei Reuven. And let's learn something else. Another rule that applies that we learn about Tanaim from b'nei Gad b'nei Reuven. Says the Gemara, Ma hasam Tanai b'dover echad u'maisa b'dover acher. Just like by Gad and by Reuven, the Tanai and the Maisa are not the same. The Tanai is that you need to fight in Eretz Yisrael. The Maisa is that you get the land. Those are two different things. Afkol. That should therefore be true by every condition. However, here you broke that rule. Why? Lafuke hacha, turning to the top of Ayin Hey Amud Beis, the Tana u'Maisa b'davar echad. All of this is hovering around the same thing, which is getting divorced. Hareze gitech, if you give me back the get. So the condition and the Maisa are the same topic. Masha'ein Kain, when we learned about a Tanai from Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, there the condition was that you need to fight in Eretz Yisrael. If you do X, you get Y. But in our case, you get Y if you do Y. And therefore, it breaks the rules of the Tnaim, and therefore Amar Rav Ada Bar Ava, he says that the reason why our brisa does not have a problem with this divorce, namely the reason why they're divorced in a case of Hareza Gitech Almanasher Tachzirini Asaniar is because the Tnayu Maisa B'Davar Echad, another psul. So therefore the Gemara pivots yet again and says, Rav Ashi Amar, how then do we understand this brisa? Let's review the brisa. Case number one is where a person says, Harezeg gitech, but the paper is mine, ein migureshes. The second case was Harezeg gitech almanas shetachzireni migureshes. So says the Gemara, how does Rav Ashi wriggle out of this? We're on ayin hamid beis, 3 lines down. And the Gemara says, Rav Ashi Amar Hamani Rebihi. To Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, we saw it's really Amar Rebbe. To Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rebbe. Should be Rebbe, no? Yeah. What do you have?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, this is definitely incorrect because this was the exact quote from Shabbos. There the Gemara said, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rebbe, Kol Omer Almanas, Ka'omer Me'ach Shavdami. You said Almanas. All that is just saying that it applies right now. It doesn't really help that much. And Lamaisa, when you said Almanas Shetachzireni Asaniyar, you're divorced. Conversation is short. And that explains why in the Seif of the Brisa, why that second case was so quick to be Megureshes. Says the Gemara, Iskin Shmuel begita de shchiv meira. Shmuel made a condition. He made a takana, I should say, not a condition. He made a takana in regards to the get of a shchiv meira. We know that a shchiv meira is a person who is about to die. And the Gemara says as follows, Im lo meisi yehe get. Im lo meisi lo yehe get. He says it in the negative. If I don't die, then this won't be a get. If I survive this illness, then it won't be a get. V'im meisi yehe get. So this is what Shmuel said that a shchiv meira should say. Right away, the Gemara is bothered with the starting from the negative, because if you looked at all of the previous cases, it started out in the positive. Vilema, why did you say the negative case first? What were you trying to accomplish? Divorce. So it says the Gemara, Vilema, what you should have said is the divorce piece first. Not that if I don't die, we're not divorced. What you should have said is imesi, yehe get, v'im lo mesi, lo yehe get. Why'd you say it backwards? So the Gemara says in regards to Shmuel's takana, lo maktim inish pur anusa lenafshe. Getting divorced is not geshmak. Nobody wants to get divorced. You don't want to be in that scenario. So you're not going to start out by saying, I'd like to get divorced. Nobody wants to get divorced. It's a din b'di'ev, as it's a din d'oraisa, but the application of it in social society is all b'di'ev. So says the Gemara, then v'lema, perhaps we should have had a double condition as follows. Lo yehe get im lo mesi. This will not be a get if I don't die. And on the side, we add in the rest. And yehe get im mesi. So says the Gemara, that doesn't work either, because T'nai kodem l'maisa, that's backwards, like we said earlier. Remember that the maisa is the get and the T'nai is the almanas. So says the Gemara that we can't do that. Maskif la rava michti, let's analyze. Kol T'nai mehecha gamrinan. Where do we learn the dinim of T'nai from? And of course we all know, mitnai b'nei Gad uvnei Ruvain. Mahasam. I have a line here. Is it Hain? Mahasam. Hain kodem lalav. By the case of the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Ruvain, Moshe spoke to them in the positive first, in the Hain, in the yes. What did he say to them? If you fight for us on the east side of the Jordan, then you can have the west side of the Jordan. If you don't, then you can't. So there, that was the structure. Afkol, that should be our case over here. But la'afuke hacha, the lav kodem lahain. So how then do we understand the takana of Shmuel? It's breaking the rules of these conditions. Ela Amar Rava says that really Shmuel's takana was multi-layered. It was a 3-phrase comment that the shchiv meira would have to say, and the first and third are the same. Line number 1: Im lo mesi lo yehe get. If I don't die, then it will not be a get, which is starting in the negative, which we spoke about, which really shouldn't be happening. And then it says im mesi yehe get, and then it says im lo mesi lo yehe get. And now let's analyze why we needed to say this odd language, this odd 3-part language where numbers 1 and 3 were the same. Im lo mesi lo yehe get, because we don't want to start out negatively. Lo maktim inish puranusa lenafshe. And then it says im mesi yehe get, im lo mesi lo yehe get. What about the next 2 lines? Because bo'in an hein kodem lalav. So Shmuel had this very odd takana of a shchiv meira, the way to thread the needle, to have a perfect tnai, so that the get that you're giving now is only because you're a shchiv meira. But we don't want you to be in a scenario where your condition doesn't work. We need to find the magic potion for you to have a condition that checks off the litmus test of Bnei Gad Uvnei Ruvain. But we also can't start up a Pur Anusa. And we need Hain before Lav. So that's why we came up with this oddball scenario where the takana of Shmuel was to say this three-part line. And that brings us to a new Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down. Very thoughtful. It's like very thorough in regards to making sure, because Shmuel was concerned that this shchiv meira, if he were to heal, would be forced to divorce his wife. You're a Kohen, it's a really big problem, whatever, these are big problems. Fine. So the Mishnah continues. Next, Hareze gitech almanas shetishamshi es abba. He says, this is your get, provided that you take care of my father, that you become, you're meshameshim, that not tashmish, you're meshameshim, that you service him, you give him meals, food, whatever the case may be. Or almanasha taniki es beni, that you nurse my child. So first the Gemara says, how long is menika? This is a very important Gemara because this comes up on fast days. In Eretz Yisrael, the poskim in Eretz Yisrael, they actually hold stark that for the first 2 years after a baby's born, women pasha don't fast. They just Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, Zehu, but the other fast, they don't even touch them. In the first 2 years, you have a din of a menekes, even if you're not nursing anymore. We lived there for a few years. My twins were born there. My wife only nursed for a month with the twins. But for 23 months, she was pater from every fast except for, that's because of this Gemara. Why? Because kamahi minikaso, how long is the period of nursing halachically? Shtei shanim, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shmona Asar Chodesh. You see the gimel of the Rambam next to Shtei shanim, and that is how we paskin, that we assume a woman to be a meinekes for 2 years. Now, what happens if the conditions aren't fulfilled? How would the condition not be fulfilled? Well, the condition was, this is your get if you service my father. This is the condition if you nurse my baby. What if meis haben, oshe meis ha'av? The condition can't be fulfilled anymore. Because in theory, it should have been 2 years or 18 months. Now you can't do anything. They died. Hare ze get. It's an impossible scenario. It's an external issue. It's not a fundamental issue. Your condition was a reasonable condition, but life threw a curveball. The baby died. The father died. Whatever the case may be. Hare ze get. What if things were a little bit more specified, though? Because now we're assuming 2 years and 18 months, because the actual language at the beginning of the Mishnah was but with no time frame. What if we add a time frame? Halfway down, we're in the 4th line of the Mishnah, 5th line of the Mishnah, halfway down Ein Hamid base. Oh, now you've added in a time frame. Now we're getting more space. It's not broad. We're not going with halachic assumptions now. The Tanai was 2 years. That was a Tanai. Not stam, but specific. Or almanasha taniki es benish shanim. Meis haben, o she'amar ha'av jiaf shet tishamshen. He says, I don't want this person to serve me. Shelo b'hakpada, for no specific reason. He just didn't want her. Says the Gemara, eino get. Wow. Got to be very careful, because that could lead to some serious issues. You've also trapped her for 2 years. She's an aguna basically for 2 years, because she can't remarry until the 2 years are over, because since the specific amount of time was listed, how can she remarry not knowing that the t'nai will ever be fulfilled? Because if one of them dies, the get is batel. So he trapped her by saying, be meshamish my father for 2 years, or be meinik my son for 2 years. The din is eino get. That's the Tanakama. Rashbag Omer, kazeh get. I disagree. Rashbag's always been a little more makil on these things. And here as well, he says that this is still considered to be a get. Klav Amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Kol akava she'ena heimena hareze get. This has nothing to do with her. She's not the cause. She's not the one who wasn't doing her job. She was supposed to do the Tanai. Service my father for 2 years. Feed the baby. It's not her fault that the scenario fell apart. The father died. The baby, that was what she's supposed to do. So that's not. So Rashbag says that when it's not her fault, that the Tanai is broken, not by her, but by an external factor, then the get is still chal. Fascinating distinction, because that means that really the condition wasn't met, but some element of onis rachmana patre, that she's out of control. What can she do? What do you want me to do? You told me to service the father for 2 years. He died. What are you going to do? So Rashbag says, when it's not her fault, I'm putting the words in here. Onus Rachmana Patre. And therefore the get is still chal. We shouldn't get divorced, but if we get divorced, just be extremely clear, because otherwise this Masechta is like any other Masechta. When you get into the weeds, the detail and the nuance of language, and you add in a time frame that maybe you gently shouldn't have added, just it ruins things. It makes things very complicated. The Gemara opens. Umi ba'inan kulehai. Do we in fact need this woman to fulfill the condition of nursing for 2 years? After all, uraminhi, we have a brisa. This is actually a tosefta and not a brisa. Shamashta yom echad. Let's say that in the case of hareze gitech almanas, that you service the father or that you nurse the baby. Shamashta yom echad hinikasa yom echad. That if you do only 1 day, hareze get. How does that stem with our Mishnah, both the Reisha and the Seifa? Amar Rav Chizda lo kasha harabanan v'Rab Shimon ben Gamliel. It's a machlokes between the two. Mas nisin. Our Mishnah is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, and our Mishnah is mekel. Ubraisa Rabbanan, where it says that they need to do only 1 day. Says the Gemara, that actually cannot be. The Reisha of our Mishnah cannot be Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Why not? Because the Seifa of our Mishnah is Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Hami the Seifa Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel have a Michlal the Reisha lav Rashbag. So that's a bad answer. Ella, sorry, it doesn't stand up to the test of time. It's not a good. It doesn't work. Ella says the Gemara, Brisa Rashbag who the Mekil Bitznai. Really, the Brisa is even more Mekil because it's only nursing for 1 day. It's only being Mishamish the father for 1 day. And Masnis and Rabbanon, who was a little bit more strict. And Rava provides another answer. Lokasha kan bistam kan b'mefarish. It depends. If you said stam, then that has one implication. And if you said b'mefarish, that has another implication. And the cases would be different. It says the Gemara, kan bistam, if you look at Rashi 10 lines from the bottom, Rashi says kan bistam, masnisin to amar shtei shanim taniki bistam. When you say nothing, then we assume whatever the standard is, that a woman's a meinekes for 2 years, you have to nurse for 2 years. The Rashi concludes, Uvraisa v'mefarish, the Brisa is when you specify 1 day. Next answer, Ravashi Omar, kol stam nami kimefarish yom echadami. How can you say that? Ravashi held that all cases of stam are 1 day. They're also like mefarish. Tanan, we have a Mishnah. Kama himanika so shtei shanim. Rabbi Huda Omer Shmona Sar Chodesh. Let's analyze this. Bishlama le Rava Nicha. According to Rava, who says that there's a difference between stam and mefaresh. Stam is 2 years, mefaresh is 1 day. I could understand the distinction between shtei shanim and 1 day. I got it. But Elo the Ravashi, who holds that both stam and mefaresh are 1 day, lama li shtei shanim, lama li shmona sar chodesh. Because according to Ravashi, who wants to say that stam is 1 day and mefaresh is also 1 day, then there should be no distinction. Says the Gemara, B'yom echad sagi. So the Gemara responds on behalf of Ravashi, last of the short lines, and we'll be going to the top of Ayin Vav Amid Aleph and stopping there. Hachi Kamar. This is the way to understand according to Ravashi. A little bit dachuk, and it's again in our balabatish sense, we would struggle with this. I did. Yom echad mishtei shanim. What he means is that you need to do at least 1 day during the first 2 years. La'afuke la'achar shtei shanim delo. But if you do your 1 day after the 2 years of her being a menekes, gets batel. That's what he meant. Yom echad mishmona sar chodesh la'afuke la'achar shmona sar chodesh telo. That just depends on which Tana you hold, like in regards to whether or not a menekes is 24 months or 18. What?
Basically, she is putting off doing this and saying no. And
What do you mean?
well, if she does it the day after the 2 years are up, isn't she like she
Get batel.
Right, so they get batel.
So what Ravashi is saying is that the way we can distinguish between the brisas is that when we are talking in the case of our Mishnah, which is stam, it means that you have to do at least 1 day during the first 2 years for the condition of the get to be chal. But if you don't, the get is batel. Our other understanding, our first understanding of the Gemara is you need to do 365 times 2. You need to do 730 days of nursing, whatever. What if you skip a day? I don't know. You got to get into the Rishon. I have no idea. But you missed a day, you went out of town. You gave the baby a bottle. Formula? Is that the same thing as made nekas? Okay. They didn't have formula. What? Yeah. Yeah, that's, by the way, some of the poskim say it by Metzitza B'peh. The language of the Gemara doesn't say Metzitza B'peh at all. That's it's not found in the Gemara. They didn't have any kalim. They just did Metzitza directly. So that's why some of the poskim are like, what Metzitza B'peh are you talking about? Whatever the Rishon have the whole tumult about this. I think I told you this, Shiloh, that this family, I'll call them conservadox. They, officially they're affiliated with some Orthodox institutions. They don't wear kippahs, they don't wear tzitzis, they're mechalel Shabbos b'far hesia, they eat treif. But they're on boards of like local Orthodox institutions. And they said to me, Phil, we want you to be the moel, but b'shum panim v'ofen, you're not allowed to do metzitza, klal uchlal, nothing. Not sterile, not non-sterile, nothing. So I said, I cannot decide that on my own. That is a minhag in Klal Yisrael. It's mefurish in the Gemara. It's a sakana to not do metzitza, as the language of the Gemara. I'm not deciding this on my own. So I called Rabbi First, who is not only a dayan, but he's also a moel. So he's like very, of course, he knows all this. He knows everything anyways, but it was just an extra layer of nuance. So I explained the scenario. I said, if they don't use me, basically, the only Orthodox moel they're going to use is not going to do metzitza. If it's me or somebody else, doesn't matter. The only way this is working is if the actual bris is done without metzitza. So Rabbi First said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to tell them, I'm going to do metzitza, but not with a kli. I'm going to do metzitza with a gauze pad. That's what he said. He said, take a gauze pad, do the chituch al hamila, cut, take a gauze pad, wrap it around the anatomy, put a lot of pressure on, enough to absorb blood into the gauze pad, because some of the Rishonim define metzitza as being motzeitz dam mikol makom achituch. And if you can draw blood out from the chituch, you're yotzazan, you're done. You're yote. Huge psak. Because it's watershed a little bit. Once you start with this, it's a very slippery slope. The Reform movement, they stopped saying you kumpurkan. It's some very low level things. This is very small, but it can be dangerous. The second you start picking minhagim that you like him, so I had to be clear to them in my language. I won't do metzitza b'peh and I won't do metzitza b'kli, but I will do metzitza b'tachboshes. I'm going to do something to make sure that we're fulfilling the minhagim of Klal Yisrael. The kachava, and I've done about 15 brises for this family's next generation of children because of that one psak. Huge. Again, like, what was the other option? They would have had a non-kosher bris, 15 kids. And by the way, at times it's worth it for a posek to say that. That's why I'm not a posek, because that's terrifying. I don't want that responsibility. But it was just a fascinating psak. How are we even talking about this? I don't even remember anymore. Oh, because the Gemara doesn't say something. What did the Gemara not say? Oh, no, we're talking about formula. Totally off the reservation. Okay, let's get back. Meisvei, the Gemara asked the question 3 lines from the bottom, Ayin Hamid base. This is the dangerous language of 2 years. And then Mesa Bain. This was the second case of the brisa that we presented, that not the brisa, the Mishnah, that our Mishnah had said that if the t'nai of the husband of 2 years was put into the actual get, so then according to the Tanakama, eino get. Bishlam ale Rava, I can understand according to Rava, who says that stam in our Mishnah means 2 years, that reisha b'delo mefarish, seifa defarish, because I can see a distinction between 2 years and 1 day. Ravashi, Maishna Reisho, Maishna Seifa. There should be no difference at all, because according to you, Stam is 1 day and Mefarish is 1 day. Zog, the Gemara, you're 100% right. He has a very difficult shita. I'm Kasha. And we'll pick up right here again in Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow night in person. Wishing you all a beautiful night.